Hey there, JJ Reynolds from GetVisionBooks.com, and I wanted to run a scenario that was someone I was talking to just this week. They were running at about $700,000 in top line revenue, right? So that's where they're running. They are looking about $700,000 in top line revenue. They're growing at a lower rate than they'd like to. They're kind of growing about 5% year over year. Nothing too crazy, but they're growing. They're not declining. That's always good. They're going there, and they have a very low churn rate as well. So they're churning about like 3%. So it's pretty good, right? Like you're low growth, low churn. They only have one employee, I know, right? So like they have themselves and then one employee. And they have a few contractors as well. So what their business looks like is they are something like this, right? So they have about 50% or 45% cost to fulfill, right? Themselves and someone else, they're paying well. Very high service there. Their cost to acquire is next to nothing. They're spending about like 1%, $7,000 a year on acquiring new customers, right? And their administration cost is basically zero, right? Because there's no one to manage, there's no one to do. So they're operating about 52% gross margins, right? So their profit is about 52% after said and done. They are good to go out the gates. The problem is they're like saying, hey, how can I grow, right? They look at their cash flow statements and they're like, uh-oh, I don't have a lot of cash flow because I'm taking all this off the table. That's where your owner's compensation can come into play. Is you're taking this money off the table. You might have 52% profit, but you're taking off that $300,000 a year as a salary that you're not accounting for, right, in your cost to fulfill. So what you might have to do is if you want to, you can go up to an administration role where you'll add in, let's just say, 11% as administration. And then you might have your cost to fulfill go down a little bit. But if you want to grow, you are then going to have to boost up this acquisition amount, right? So now we might be growing at a higher percentage. We might be growing at 10, 20% year over year, but our margins have gotten a little bit tighter for the future growth that we're about to incur. That is where our cash comes into play, right? So that's where you can start to play with your cash flow statements and say, is this enough cash flow to get me where I want to go? You might have a starting cash on hand of, let's just say $50,000, right? So you have that, and you want to keep, let's just say 3 months in reserve. That's fairly okay. Like I'd say 3 to 6 months of operating expenses is fairly normal. And then you have we have our total costs is about $483,000. Our net profit is $217,000, and our net operating expense is about $30,000. That is a pretty good business, right? You're starting to grow. You now have available cash at $112,000. Your operating reserve should be about $87,000. But because you have such high margins, you're going to have to spend about $65,000 on your next tax payment, right? So we're going to need to make sure that you have that $65,000 plus that $87,500 to say, hey, we have this available in a bank account, right? The question now comes back is, can I hire someone? Can I grow beyond the 6% that I'm currently at? And that's where you can come up here and say, yeah, you can. If you go 20% here, your administration cost, we've shifted that over. And now you have your cost to acquire at 20% and your cost to fulfill is down to 40%. We're now running at a 20 to 30% margin, 29% here, and we have enough cash on hand, right? And that's where you're going to start seeing this growth because we're growing at 20%. So hopefully you can start to see that upward trajectory. Whereas if you just kept that cash in the bank and you weren't investing into acquisition and your P&L didn't look like this, where you have an actual cost to acquiring new people, new customers, you would not see this. So what does that look like down here, right? So you have your starting cash is $50,000. You're going to need $89,000 to get there, and then your $15,250. So as you start saving up for that in your bank account will go up, right? You'll have that $89,000 there, and you will then start to look out at the future and say, whoa, that looks great. The beauty of this is as you start growing, you're going to have these percentages kind of balloon with you. 50% on month 1 is very different than 50% on month 7, right? If you're growing at a 20% growth and only churning out 3%. So the question of the day is, can you hire? Can you afford to hire, or can you afford to grow? This is the beauty of having good books on hand, is that you can say, hey, I can afford to hire someone to push that on the acquisition side of things. We need to start acquiring more people. Maybe you invest more money in the Zook machine with Facebook. Maybe you decide, hey, I really would like to take more cash on hand and let's slow down growth. We don't need to grow at that high. I will then start taking that cash off the table. And now we are running a very profitable business. Our net profit, $200,000 a year. That is how you use your financial plan to say, hey, am I doing this? Am I executing against my books? Again, if you do not have clean books, you don't know how to know to do this, contact us, getvisionbooks.com, fill out an application. We'd be happy to talk to you about getting your QuickBooks in order. Hope this was helpful. My name is JJ Reynolds, and I will see you in the next one.